Everyone has a secret, private life, and your secondary characters are no different. We don't need the full story. We don't need an interior monologue that hijacks the scene. We just need the edge of it, just enough that the reader senses the depth, feels the presence of a life being lived just outside the frame. You don't put it on the page necessarily. You bring it to the page, and the reader feels the difference. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has the story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. I've been reading Ellen Hildebrand's mystery, The Perfect Couple. This was adapted into the Netflix series, but the book I think is much better because the book goes into all the behind-the-scenes happenings that the Netflix series leaves out. Of course, because it's a different medium. The novel takes place in Nantucket as a very rich, extravagant married couple are hosting their son's wedding to Celeste. Celeste is the main protagonist, but the novel is an ensemble. Hildebrand weaves together a massive character-driven narrative. So we have the main protagonist, Celeste, the bride-to-be. There's also roughly 15 to 20 key secondary characters. The secondary characters are so well drawn. Hildebrand must have known about each of them before she put them on the page or as she was writing them, because every single person around this event, the death of the maid of honor, is carrying something, a secret, a desire, a past, a desperation they can't show. And the whole novel runs on that invisible interior life, the things people are living that nobody else at the wedding knows about. And that quality, that sense of a world teeming with life, people in your main character's orbit who have their own full, complicated lives is something every novelist can build. So let's talk about the characters who are not your protagonist. You know your main character. You've lived inside her head for months. You know what she wants, what she's afraid of, what she's willing to risk. But I'm talking about everyone else, the husband, the best friend, the sister, the mother-in-law, the therapist, the colleague who keeps showing up, the neighbor who knows too much. Now, I'm not suggesting you have as many secondary and supporting characters as the perfect couple, but you will have other characters in your protagonist's life who aren't just there because they would be, the husband, the boss, the neighbor, the mother-in-law, etc. Most beginning writers treat all of these characters the same way. They're not the protagonist, so they get whatever's left over. A name, a few traits, a function. They're in the room, but they disappear. They're invisible. They're often just filler that makes your story thin. But these characters aren't all the same. They have different roles in your story. And understanding the difference is what allows you to give each one exactly what they need. No more, no less. So let's sort them out. There are 3 levels of character. The first, of course, is your primary character, your protagonist, the person the story revolves around. We see the world through your main character's perspective. She undergoes the major transformation, so you already know her better than anyone else in your story. That's as it should be. The second level is your secondary characters. These are the people who live in your story alongside your protagonist. They appear across multiple scenes. The reader builds a relationship with them over time. They affect the trajectory of your story. They create friction, shift decisions, open and close doors. The husband in a marriage that's unraveling, the best friend who knows too much, the sister whose choices put pressure on everyone around her, the mother-in-law, the colleague who keeps showing up. Secondary characters exist on a spectrum. Some are deeply woven into your protagonist's story. They have their own wants, their own tensions, maybe even their own thread running through the narrative. Others appear regularly, but in service of a specific function. The therapist your protagonist sees every week, the neighbor who keeps turning up. Both are secondary, but the ones who carry more weight in your story need more behind them. The third level is the minor character, the yoga teacher, the store clerk, the cab driver, the stranger at the party who says the one thing that lands differently than anyone expected. Minor characters pass through a scene. Their job is to serve that one moment, to reveal something about your protagonist, create a brief friction, ground the scene in a specific world. Then they're gone. I did an entire episode on minor characters, episode 47. Even minor characters play a major role. Episode 47, I'll link in the show notes. But today, I want to focus on secondary characters because that's where I see the most work left on the table. You've done the work. You know who the husband is. You've given him a personality, a history, maybe even a moment early in the story where he feels completely real. And then your protagonist hits a crisis point in, let's say, chapter 9. And she comes home and he's in the kitchen. He hands her a cup of coffee and says something supportive or something dismissive, whatever the scene needs. And then he's gone. Not because you forgot about him, but because in that moment you were so focused on what your protagonist needed from that scene, the emotional beat she had to hit, the decision she was moving toward, the thing that needed to happen next. These characters are so thinly drawn, they're just instruments. They said the thing, they did the thing, and then they stepped aside. This is the scene level opportunity that most writers miss. And it's different from the story level work you did when you built these characters. You can know exactly who the husband is and still flatten him the moment your protagonist walks into a room with something urgent on her mind. Because here's what's true about every secondary character in every scene you write. They walked into that room with something already going on. The husband has been turning something over all morning. He's preoccupied or quietly pleased about something, or he's been waiting for the right moment to say something he hasn't said yet. That's behind the page. It doesn't have to be stated, but if you don't know it's there, if you haven't asked the question, he's going to hand her the coffee and disappear every single time. Now, I just came across this term called sonder. Sonder is the realization that every person you pass on the street is living a life as vivid, as complex, and as central to them as yours is to you. The stranger on the subway has a history, a fear, something she's hoping for. The man at the coffee counter has been carrying something since this morning that has nothing to do with your order. You'll never know what it is, but for one moment you register that it exists. Everyone has a secret, private life, and your secondary characters are no different. We don't need the full story. We don't need an interior monologue that hijacks the scene. We just need the edge of it, just enough that the reader senses the depth, feels the presence of a life being lived just outside the frame. You don't put it on the page necessarily. You bring it to the page, and the reader feels the difference. So let me bring this back to the perfect couple. Every person who comes to the house for that wedding is carrying something the reader doesn't know yet. And their behavior only makes sense once you know what it is. For example, Shooter, the best man, from the moment the police start asking questions, he keeps running. He's evasive, he deflects, he disappears. Every instinct says he's guilty. He knows something. And then you find out the truth. He's in love with the bride. That's what he's been carrying the entire novel. Not guilt, love he can't admit. He runs from the police not because he killed anyone, but because being questioned means being seen, and being seen means his feelings become visible, and that's what he can't face. So his behavior makes complete sense all along. We just didn't have access to what he was living through. And then we have Abby, the groom's sister-in-law. She's pregnant. She's kind of quiet. She's peripheral, but she has her own invisible story running the whole time. Her husband is in debt. She's desperate. She's watching another woman circle him. That desperation leads her to do something reckless that she never intends to turn fatal. Her interior life, the thing she's carrying that nobody at that wedding knows about, sets the entire tragedy in motion. She's not a major player. At least we don't see her in the beginning that way. She gets a chapter where the police are questioning her, but she is load-bearing, and Hildebrand knew exactly who she was long before the reader did. And then there's Celeste's mother. She's at her daughter's wedding, and she's dying of cancer. She has barbiturates for pain management. And she has her own secret that she's keeping from her husband and her daughter. She's planning to die on her own terms using drugs. That detail seems incidental, just part of who she is, just the quiet grief at the edges of what should be a joyful occasion. And then the toxicology report comes back, and suddenly Celeste's mother becomes central. She's part of the larger fabric of the story because the maid of honor, Merritt, who is found dead the morning of the wedding, died from barbiturates. So that's what you're building toward when you develop your secondary characters. Characters who are living their own story, quietly, invisibly, just off the page, and whose lives press against your protagonists in a way that feels earned because you knew what they were carrying all along. When it comes to secondary characters, these are characters who are in your character's life. So they're not minor. They're in their everyday life. You need to know what their role in the story is. And you want to give them what that role requires. No more, no less. And before you write any scene where your protagonist isn't alone, ask yourself this question. Not about her, about everyone else in the room. What is this person living right now outside of my protagonist's story? What secret are they holding? What private desire do they have? What's their backstory? This doesn't have to be on the page. You just need to know it. You don't have to write all of it. You just have to know it's there. That's what makes the difference between a world that feels inhabited and a world that feels built around one person. A world that feels thin and barely realized. When you know what every character in your story is carrying, the whole world of your story comes alive. It's teeming with life, not just your protagonist, but everyone. Remember, every character in your story is living a full, invisible, private life. You don't have to put it all on the page. You just have to know it's there. So go to your work in progress, pick one secondary character, and ask the question, what is this person living right now outside of my protagonist's story? Then give them that. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.